Planet America's fake news.
What the hell is going on here?
Welcome once again to Planet America. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Shazza Chidelli.
This week, first stop, Iowa. Democrats descend on the Hawkeye state to win over voters just 6 months out from the caucuses.
Take it back now! This is America!
Also this week, the chemical you probably haven't heard of that's poisoning America.
In the history department, what happened the last time America banned some guns?
And I'll find out why Donald Trump really hates America's courts, the Ninth Circuit in particular. But first, this.
The week began with the apparent suicide of alleged sex trafficker and convicted pedophile Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein was facing up to 45 years in prison after being arrested in July on multiple charges relating to the abuse of underage girls. He was being held at the Department of Justice Metropolitan Correction Facility in Lower Manhattan. Attorney General William Barr has vowed to get to the bottom of what happened. And he had this warning for Epstein's co-conspirators.
But let me assure you that this case will continue on against anyone who was complicit with Epstein. Any co-conspirators should not rest easy.
High-profile political figures, including Bill Clinton and Donald Trump, are known to have associated with Epstein in the past. And alleged victims of Epstein claim to have been forced to have had sexual contact with other prominent men, including Prince Andrew, Professor Alan Dershowitz, and former New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson, who was on this program just last week. Richardson, Dershowitz, and Prince Andrew have all denied the allegations. Meanwhile, President Trump took the extraordinary step of fueling conspiracy theories about Epstein's death by retweeting this video by actor and comedian Terrence K. Williams.
You know what? Now, I'm not going to say who killed that man because you know I could end up being, but the word around the street is the Clintons did it. I don't know though. Hey, I'm just another black man on Twitter.
President Trump then retweeted that to his 63 million followers. Advisor Kellyanne Conway was asked about that.
Why did the president then retweet that Clinton suggestion?
I think the president just wants everything to be investigated.
This is how the president explained himself.
The retweet, which is what it was, the retweet, was from somebody that's a very respected conservative pundit.
Now, I don't want to suggest that a comedian can't be a highly respected pundit, because they can. How you doing? But Terrence Williams? He's the guy who's best known for being too racist for Fox News. This is him talking about New York Times writer Sarah Jeong.
I don't know. No. It's something wrong with them fortune cookies that Ling Ling is eating. She's eating. It's not wrong with her.
Terrence, I think you now got yourself in trouble.
No.
And he was never seen on Fox again. And more importantly, when Facebook started fact-checking his rant, this was how Williams responded.
I am a comedian. How can you fact-check a joke?
So it seems that Trump has a higher view of Williams' punditry skills than Williams does.
And he wasn't finished there. The president went on to talk about the number of times Bill Clinton flew with Epstein. And then he asked,
Did Bill Clinton go to the island? Because Epstein had an island. That was not a good place, as I understand it, and I was never there. So you have to ask, did Bill Clinton go to the island?
And adding fuel to conspiracy theories, Epstein's autopsy showed multiple broken bones in his neck, which experts suggest can be the result of strangulation or someone, particularly an older male, hanging themselves. Now, Chaz, as we have discussed before, there is some evidence to suggest that Bill Clinton spent a lot more time with Jeffrey Epstein than he has admitted.
27 times to 4 times.
On the plane.
Yeah.
There is, however, no evidence, credible evidence, to support these wild claims that have persisted for 25 years or more that the Clintons go around having people killed, including their friend Vince Foster.
Yes.
This is a pretty familiar Trump tactic. Make an outrageous claim to draw attention to another issue potentially damaging for your enemies. That being said, though, Chaz, if Bill Clinton did want to have Epstein whacked, it might be because of this. An actual painting that Epstein had on the wall of his house in New York of Bill Clinton wearing a Monica Lewinsky-like blue dress. And that picture is something you cannot unsee.
Epstein really was a strange man.
Sick
Now,
boy.
you've been talking conspiracies, and it is true that a lot of things had to go wrong for this death to occur. A prisoner who was already suspected of attempting suicide and so was placed on suicide watch on July 23 was somehow removed from suicide watch just 6 days later, at which point he was placed in a cell with no cameras filming inside, where he should have had a cellmate, but that cellmate was transferred the day before he died and no replacement was made. The two guards on duty were both working overtime, one of them for the 5th straight day, and instead of checking him every 30 minutes like they were supposed to, neither checked him for 3 hours, during which time both had been asleep for some or all of the time. It's no wonder that with all those coincidences, 42% of people think Epstein was murdered and only 29% think he committed suicide. But according to the New York Times, one of the people who is confident he committed suicide is the New York medical examiner, and she counts for a lot. Also, maybe this actually isn't so unusual. Every year, more than 300 people commit suicide awaiting trial. They are 7 times more likely to do it than when serving their sentence. And as for the staffing situation, during Trump's first 2 years, a hiring freeze saw the Bureau of Prison staff numbers drop by 4,600, or 12% of total staff. They haven't had a permanent director for over a year. And in fact, the Department of Justice still intends to cut 1,100 more staff. So maybe this kind of thing happens a lot more than we think. But either way, I just want to get back to that conspiracy theory for a minute. Let's ignore how hard it would be for the Clintons to have someone murdered in a prison run by a Republican Department of Justice and how much Trump would want to expose them. Let's ignore that there was a camera reportedly outside his cell that would have caught anyone going in. Let's instead assume that Hillary Clinton is the angel of death, that she can kill anyone she wants anytime she likes. Let's assume that she's like that dude in Terminator 2. Yeah, that dude there. There she is. She's a killing machine. So, why would Hillary have Epstein killed now when she and Bill are retired and have nothing to lose, rather than when Epstein was first arrested in 2007 and she was about to run for president? Why did she let him off then? And why not kill him before he was arrested a second time? We all knew that the arrest was coming. It would have been far easier and less suspicious to kill him 12 months ago. And why did she wait till he'd been in jail for a few weeks so he had plenty of time to blab to the FBI about anything he liked? And why, by the way, kill Epstein, who said nothing, instead of the 2 or 3 sexual assault survivors who are the ones who are doing all the talking? Why not kill them? And why kill Epstein in jail when his offsider who knew everything he did, Ghislaine Maxwell, is currently living it up in Massachusetts in a mansion, alive and well? None of this makes sense. Terrence Williams was right, John. You can't fact check a joke.
So you're saying Trump did it?
No!
This incredibly long and expensive election campaign leading to the statistically likely re-election of President Trump 2020.
6 months out from the first in the nation Iowa caucuses, and the rural Midwestern state was again the centre of the political universe this week. More than 20 Democratic presidential hopefuls making speeches, shaking hands and kissing babies at the state fair in Des Moines. There are meet and greets, ice cream socials, events for a few dozen supporters in private homes and speeches for thousands at cattle call events like the Iowa Wingding. Former Vice President Joe Biden has, of course, been there running for president before. In 1988, it was at the Iowa State Fair that he made a debate gaffe that scuttled his campaign.
Why is it that Joe Biden is the first in his family ever to go to a university?
Why am I the first Kinnick in 1,000 generations to be able to get the university?
And again, in 2008, Biden campaigned hard for the presidency in Iowa, but only got about 1% support and dropped out. This time, though, he is the front-runner and under intense scrutiny. So when he says things like this...
We choose truth over facts.
It triggers reactions like this.
I am suggesting that his latest gaffes are the result of his age. Joe Biden is just not sharp. That's true of many people in their 70s, myself included.
Meanwhile, another man in his 70s weighed in.
Joe Biden just said we believe in facts, not truth. Does anybody really believe he's mentally fit to be president? We are playing in a very big and complicated world. Joe doesn't have a clue.
But that speech at the Iowa State Fair was not the only time Biden misspoke.
Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids.
Non-white kids are poor and white kids aren't poor. Is that really what he meant to say?
Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids. Wealthy kids, black kids, Asian kids.
OK, you misspoke, he cleaned it up, but this was harder to fix.
Watch what happened when those kids from Parkland came up to see me when I was vice president. They went under the, and some of you covered it.
And Biden said that not once but twice. He wasn't vice president at the time of the Parkland shooting in February 2018. His campaign said that he was thinking about the 2012 Sandy Hook massacre and that he did meet the survivors of both school shootings. Well, here's Sean Hannity's take.
All right, sleepy, creepy, crazy Uncle Joe Biden, well, his biggest opponent right now continues to be himself as the so-called Democratic frontrunner still making gaffe after gaffe after gaffe, blunder after blunder.
Well, at least Biden's fellow Democrats would have come to the rescue.
I want to read you a quote from the Madison County Democratic Chair. Quote, "There is starting to be a real fear that he cannot hold his own in the debate against Donald Trump." Do you share that concern about the former vice president?
I think that you can ask his campaign about that.
Are you concerned about the misspeaking?
I think that you have to ask his campaign about that. I think he has explanations for what he has said, and so you'll have to talk to them about it.
Thanks for the rousing defence, Kamala.
Not helping. Well, here's why Fox News and President Trump are so keen to highlight Biden's gaffes and use them to question his mental acuity. Joe Biden leads Trump by more than 8 points nationally. But of course, as we found out in 2016, it's all about the states and the Electoral College. Bad news for the president there as well. In Texas, Biden is leading Trump by 2 points. That's a state Democrats haven't won since 1976. And that's not a one-off either. A poll in June found Biden winning Texas by 4. And things are bad for President Trump right now in a bunch of other states that he won in 2016. In North Carolina, Biden leads by almost 8 points. In Ohio, Biden leads by 8. In Maine, Biden again by 8. In Florida, Biden is up by 9. Pennsylvania going for Biden by more than 10 points. Biden leading in Michigan by well over 10 points as well. In Wisconsin, Biden by 8. In Arizona, Biden by 5. In Georgia, leaked Trump campaign polling had the president losing by 6. Based on those polls, Joe Biden would be elected president by a wide margin right now. 368 electoral votes to 169. You need 270 to win. Add Texas to that. It is a massive rout, 406 to 131. It all makes you wonder, really, does Sean Hannity mean it when he says things like this?
It's getting worse by the day. If I'm Donald Trump, I'm thinking maybe I want this guy to get the nomination.
Meanwhile, Biden's lead in the race for the Democratic nomination has narrowed slightly, down from around 14 to 12 points this week. Elizabeth Warren has gained 10 points since June and has now overtaken Bernie to be second, followed by Harris, Buttigieg, Beto, Booker, Yang, Gabbard and Amy Klobuchar, the only other candidate above 1% chance.
Unfortunately, 1% ain't going to cut it for the next debate, John. Last week I showed you this summary of the state of play. Well, 2 weeks out from their deadline, the only thing that's changed is that Tom Steyer is now just one good poll away from qualifying, which I expect he'll get because he's spent more money this month than Pete Buttigieg has spent all year. Steyer's spent $8.5 million on TV ads when almost no one else has even started TV advertising. Steyer has spent 3 times as much on Facebook this month as any other candidate. And it appears to be working. Or maybe the people are just responding to his campaign promising to get money out of politics. That's a winning message, John. Vote 1 hypocrisy. Tulsi Gabbard's trying a different tack, though. She's spending her final 2 weeks before the qualifying deadline on active duty in a joint training exercise mission in Indonesia. Ironically, you know, John, this could actually help her with those 3 good polls.
It worked for Matt Santos in the West Wing.
There you go. It's an impressive thing to do. It's getting some media coverage. It worked in the West Wing. Certainly getting more coverage than she get pretending to like corn dogs at some fair. So
no, they're tasty. I won't hear anything against the corn dogs. Well, for more on what the polls reveal about the 2020 Democratic race, we're going to speak to one of the most respected pollsters and advisors in American politics today, Celinda Lake.
Oh, actually, I'm glad we're talking to her because I saw Celinda referring to an interesting poll from New Hampshire a few weeks back. It was a CNN poll back in July. Look at these. These are the favourability ratings of the candidates. Pretty standard, really. Sanders and Warren up the top, then Biden and Harris together, then Buttigieg and Booker together, and then it drops off. But when they asked which candidates were most likeable, Biden, Sanders and Buttigieg were miles ahead of Warren and Harris. So is there a gender factor in likability? Because likability is considered very closely tied to electability when it comes to an executive. And this is something that Celinda has studied a fair bit.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Well, Celinda Lake has worked for Democrats from Bill Clinton to Joe Biden, and she is with us from our studio in Washington, D.C. Celinda Lake, welcome back to Planet America.
Nice to be here. Thank you so much.
A lot of polls show that more than anything else, Democrats are looking for a candidate who can beat Donald Trump. But how does a candidate go about showing that that is them?
People are really trying to figure that out, and voters themselves don't know what they mean. One thing we know for sure is it's never been rated as high as it is right now. And it's up to 51% of the voters who say someone who can beat Donald Trump, that's my number one choice. People are looking at a variety of things, and candidates are trying to offer a variety of styles and answers to that. Clearly, one thing is experience, having been in the Oval Office or close to the Oval Office, gravitas, foreign policy as well as domestic policy experience, and that's clearly Joe Biden's lane. Other people are trying to show toughness in the debate, the ability to challenge, as Kamala Harris says, the ability to prosecute the case against Donald Trump to Donald Trump and try to show that in the Democratic debate. Other people are showing plans and ideas and saying that electability comes not from just the critique, but from offering a positive alternative. And clearly Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are trying to offer that lane. So voters and candidates, I think, are trying to figure that out. Right now in the polls, Joe Biden has the biggest advantage on that trait. And I think that's just because he's been the vice president. He's so seasoned. He's been around. He's tough. He's resilient. And so people really think right now that he is the one who can really beat Donald Trump. They also think that his appeal to the Midwest and to blue-collar voters, like where he came from in Scranton, Pennsylvania, is a big advantage. But voters are trying to figure it out, and so are candidates.
I wonder what role gender plays in the notion of electability. No woman has ever been elected president. The only female nominee was beaten by Trump. Does that put candidates like Warren and Harris at a disadvantage?
There is a little bit of a doubt that voters have, and we know two things about women candidates. We know that they're not assumed to be qualified. They have to prove that they're qualified. And that's true whether they're running for governor or U.S. Senate or president. And there are many women who successfully prove that, but it's not assumed the way it is for men. And I think there's also a caution that voters have about, quote unquote, taking the risk of voting for a person of color or a young candidate or a gay candidate or a woman. People are very conservative about that right now. Normally, the Democratic primary electorate would be relishing that, but they are worried about what happens in a general election, not in a primary, but in a general.
Warren is in second place overall, but in the crosstabs of polls, they often say that they love her policies, but they don't think she can win. Is that the female factor, or maybe to do with her tussle with Trump over her DNA test last year, or is it something else again?
Oh, I don't think it's so much the DNA, etc. I think it's being a woman. I think it's being progressive. I think it's being from Massachusetts. I think it's being a senator as opposed to a vice president. So I think all of those things are things that people are weighing a little bit. Again, she dominates ideas, so she answered that question. And I think people think her presentation of her ideas makes her pretty qualified. But there's still the nagging doubt that people have about women, about people who haven't been a VP, about somebody who hasn't been vetted by Barack Obama in quite the same way, about someone who's a progressive, and there'd be doubts about that with Bernie Sanders as well. Because in this particular case, winnability for voters is about beating Donald Trump with the Midwestern voters that he took last time to beat us.
The top three Democrats, Biden, Warren and Sanders, are historically old for a first-time nominee, older than Trump was. Is age an issue with voters?
It can be an issue. I think that it can be an issue that is put aside by energy and aggressiveness. And so I think that an energetic presentation can deal with that issue. But sure, I think that being change and being part of and not being part of the past is very appealing to Democrats. So I think they do raise those issues, and I think when Joe Biden gives a fiery speech on the soul of the nation, when Bernie Sanders gives a fiery speech on Wall Street, I don't think anybody questions their age. If they look tired on the stump, then people question their age. So again, part of it is I think Democrats so much want to beat Donald Trump that they're really checking themselves constantly, and they're really nervous about who can beat Donald Trump. Because I think most Democrats believe right now that they would work their heart outs for Dennis the Menace if he could beat Donald Trump.
Well, Biden's only a couple of years older than President Trump. When he makes a gaffe, as he has recently, that is certainly fueling questions about Biden's age.
You know, I honestly think that is more of a press narrative in the country than it is a voter narrative. Voters are pretty used to Joe Biden, and they're pretty used to Uncle Joe saying something wrong. And in these cases, he corrected it immediately. And of course, Donald Trump makes gaffes all the time, but he also tells lies all the time, and he doesn't correct himself, and he bullies everybody who even accuses him of making a gaffe. So I think there's a pretty stark contrast here, and I actually think this whole notion of these gaffes being damaging is much, much more a press narrative than a voter narrative. Voters are used to it.
Celinda Lake, great to have you with us again. Thank you.
Thanks.
And before we leave the 2020 race for this week, it's time to play
Guess Who Won't Be President?
And this week it's former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper, whose four-syllable name was the most memorable thing about his presidential campaign. There he goes. He's out of the race. The Loop was likely to miss out on the next round of debates in September, but the final straw for him this week might have been this, a poll showing Hickenlooper in a commanding position to win the Democratic nomination for Senator from Colorado. The Loop leads State Senator and former Obama advisor Mike Johnston by 51 points. This is a seat currently held by Republican Cory Gardner, who is among the most vulnerable sitting senators up for re-election next year.
Yeah, running for Senate's a good option for someone who stands absolutely no chance. Beto! But Hickenlooper was a strong supporter of legal immigrant worker programs, John. So it's a little ironic that as he departs the stage, the administration has started fooling with the public charge rule for legal immigrants. Now, I'm going to explain all this in detail on next week's show. But basically, this will make it harder for legal immigrants to obtain green cards if they are low-wage workers. That's, of course, if it beats the legal challenge. A very big F. To the wall!
Big, beautiful wall.
You know how it goes. The Trump administration announces some kind of regulation change and the entire world goes into meltdown. Miley Cyrus kisses the ex of some Kardashian. Peter Siddle gets selected over Mitchell Stark, not once, but twice. Chris Cuomo takes it all particularly badly.
Can wreck your shit. I'll wreck your shit.
Watch out for him. And before you know it, 3 states have vowed to take Trump to court. Business as usual? Maybe. Except in Trump's case, he's constantly losing. as of March this year, the Trump administration had lost cases in federal courts 63 times. That is an awful lot. So why so many losses? Well, let's play judge. Firstly...
Yeah, let's play judge!
No, I meant metaphorically, John. Firstly, there are more lawsuits now. These here are just the cases brought by state attorneys general. So there are heaps more cases out there, yet these alone have skyrocketed under Trump to 83 lawsuits so far. That's more than Obama had to deal with over his entire 8 years. And just in case there was any doubt at all, yes, the lawsuits are almost all from blue states. Okay, so there are lots of lawsuits, but why are they successful? Well, you know what Trump would say.
The Ninth Circuit is a complete and total disaster.
And look, it's true. According to the Washington Post, as of March, almost 50% of Trump's court losses did come just from the Ninth Circuit. Although that does reflect the fact that California in the Ninth Circuit is responsible for a lot of court challenges. Also, to be fair to Trump, 71% of the judges that have ruled against him have been appointed by Democratic presidents. So there may be some partisanship at play there. On the other hand, there may be something else. A large number of these court cases involve something called the Administrative Procedure Act. Now, when an agency changes a rule, it has to go through a particular process under the Act. It has to publish the changes, it has to gather feedback, it has to respond to the feedback, and then explain why they made that decision. And the decision, by the way, can't be arbitrary or capricious. Now, that's a pretty low bar. But at least according to a Georgetown law professor, Trump's agencies don't even come close to clearing that bar. They're apparently frequently not doing their homework. Well, how frequently? Normally in these federal agency court rulings, the government wins about 70% of the time. In the case of this administration, they've won exactly 3 of these cases out of 47, or 6% of cases. So you be the judge of who's at fault here.
You be the judge?
I said they could be the judge, John. Them, John.
Oh, fine, get it over with. Either way, let's see if the administration's put in the work with this rule change.
It's anyone's guess whether we're going to see changes to gun laws after the El Paso and Dayton mass shootings. A quarter of a century ago, though, Congress did pass a ban on high-capacity weapons in response to a series of massacres and a climbing crime rate. So, what happened? In the early 1990s, crime rates had been climbing alarmingly for 30 years. As well as homicides, assaults and robberies, a new kind of crime was emerging.
When the rampage was over, 5 students lay dead, a teacher and more than 30 students were injured.
The 1989 shooting at an elementary school in Stockton, California shone a particular spotlight on the weapons used.
The killing machine was this AK-47 with bayonet. Carved into the barrel was the word Hezbollah, the name of an Iranian terrorist group. There were also the words freedom and victory.
The gunman was a violent alcoholic with a long criminal record and a grudge against Asian immigrants. Many wondered why he was allowed to walk into a gun shop and buy an AK-47. In 1991, it happened again. This time, 21 people were killed at a crowded cafeteria in Texas.
Federal ATF agents have traced the 2 9mm semi-automatic handguns that were used in the killings.
President Bill Clinton pushed Congress to pass a ban on assault weapons in 1994.
It's amazing to me that we even have to have this debate. I mean, how long are we going to let this go on?
But the debate did go on, and a number of concessions were made to the gun lobby. It wouldn't apply to existing weapons, so 1.5 million guns already in the community remained legal. The bill did ban the manufacture of military-style assault weapons with specific combat features, copycat models and certain high-capacity magazines of more than 10 rounds. President Clinton signed the bill the same day it narrowly passed the Senate and claimed victory.
We will finally ban these assault weapons from our street that have no purpose other than to kill.
But gun makers had upped their production as the bill worked its way through towards a final vote. So, perversely, for a number of years, assault weapons were easier and cheaper to get. And gun makers also made slight modifications to newer models to get around the specifics of the ban. The new gun laws were an issue in the 1994 midterms, and that was bad news for Clinton's Democrats.
Republicans are now the majority party both in the Congress and in the governor's mansions across the nation.
The 1994 assault weapons ban also had a sunset clause, so it expired in 2004, and subsequent attempts to reinstate it have all failed. One of the reasons for that is doubts about whether it actually worked. The US crime rate, including homicides, has come down dramatically. You can see the rise in the early 60s and the fall since the early 1990s. But as you can also see, it's handguns that are used in most murders, not assault weapons. In fact, assault rifles are used in just 2% of all gun crimes, but they're used in 85% of mass shootings. A study earlier this year from New York University analysed the number of mass shooting deaths before, during and after the assault weapons ban and concluded mass shooting-related homicides in the United States were reduced during the years of the federal assault weapons ban of 1994 to 2004. The study put that reduction at 70%, so it worked. Well, maybe. The authors didn't claim cause and effect. Remember, all crime went down during that period. Violent crime reduced by more than half, property crime by more than 40%. And there are all sorts of other explanations about why that might be. There was a lot in that 1994 federal crime bill, which we'll look at in detail next week, including a ban on juveniles owning handguns. At the same time, state and local governments were getting tough on crime. New York's new mayor, Rudy Giuliani, put thousands of additional police on the beat and instituted a zero-tolerance approach. Crack down on small crimes and you'll prevent more major crimes, so the theory went.
Today, I'm very, very pleased to announce that New York City dropped, in terms of serious felony crime, 18.3% in the first 6 months of 1995.
But crime also went down in cities with more liberal laws. So what else was happening?
See your hands. Let's go.
Some have suggested taking the lead out of petrol and paint in the 1970s and 80s saw fewer children growing up with the kind of aggressive behaviours associated with lead exposure. Others suggested the legalisation of abortion after 1973's Roe v. Wade ruling has seen a reduction in the number of unwanted children born into difficult family situations. Or maybe it's the use of antidepressants, or maybe computers and big data being used in better policing.
Our economy grew at a strong 4.2% rate in the last quarter.
The economy improved in the 1990s, so maybe that helped. More people had mobile phones to call for assistance. Fewer people were carrying cash to be mugged, and the epidemic of crack cocaine use ended. But there is one theory that supporters of gun control really don't like. In the period that homicide rates fell by almost half, the number of privately owned guns in America increased by almost half. Criminals are afraid of people with guns. Or at least, that's the theory.
Per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS, have been around since the 1940s. These chemicals have been found in carpets, clothing, furniture fabrics, firefighting foam, resistant cookware, shaving cream, makeup, and dental floss. There are 96 different varieties of them in widespread distribution, but the two we'll be focusing on are PFOA and PFOS. They were originally found in Teflon and Scotchgard, and they've both been banned. But unfortunately, they haven't gone anywhere. When used in manufacturing, they were released into the soil and water, and now they've accumulated in both our environment and in our blood, with some unfortunate consequences. PFAS exposure could affect the growth, learning and behaviour of children, reduce fertility, interfere with hormones, increase your cholesterol, increase your risk of cancer, and reduce your penis size. There, that got your attention. Given their dangers, you'd think there'd be some kind of legal limit as to how much PFOA and PFOS is allowed in your drinking water. But The EPA has only set a non-enforceable health advisory level of 70 parts per trillion, which should be at least 7 to 10 times lower, according to the EPA's own draft report that they tried to keep secret from the public. Internal emails revealed the Trump administration had been scared the report would cause, quote, a public nightmare. Luckily for them, it turned out that no one gave a stuff. Even though other scientists found that the limit shouldn't just be the current guideline of 70 parts per trillion or the EPA's secret finding of about 10 parts per trillion, but should actually be about 1 part per trillion. And in fact, some say that, like lead, there actually is no safe level of PFAS exposure, particularly for children. So how widespread is the contamination? Well, it depends what standard you use. There are 198 different water utilities that don't meet the EPA's public PFAS standards, but if you tighten those standards to 5 parts per trillion, which is slightly tighter than the EPA's secret report, about 1,000 water utilities fail the test. And if your standard is 2.5 parts per trillion, 1,900 of America's 5,000 water utilities fail. We're talking about 110 million people potentially having contaminated water. And even by the EPA's current standards, 126 military bases fail the test. As far as geography goes, Michigan and New Jersey are particularly polluted. Michigan, you see, was the home for companies like Scotchgard. Last year, Michigan even declared a state of emergency about some of their water, with results as high as 1,500 parts per trillion. Some towns even had to rely on bottled water, which has unsurprisingly led to lawsuits, including from our next guest, Aaron Phelps, an environmental lawyer representing over 500 clients who are trying to sort out this issue. Aaron Phelps, welcome to Planet America.
Good to be here.
Aaron, the EPA are publicly saying that a safe level of PFAS contamination is 70 parts per trillion, but some scientists say that it's never safe. From your experiences, what's the least amount of contamination that you've seen likely negative effects from?
So we have, in my state of Michigan, we have proposed regulatory criteria that is substantially below 70. That is not final yet. Will probably be final early next year, and we're into single digits, 6s, 8s parts per trillion in the PFOA, PFOS realm. So that could change, but that is where the state regulatory agency in Michigan is starting.
Now, Aaron, you have a lot of clients who have been subjected to PFAS contamination. What are the kinds of side effects that you've observed from your clients?
Well, they range. So on one end, we have very serious diseases. We have cancers, kidney cancer, testicular cancer, a high prevalence of prostate cancer. On the other end of the spectrum, you have more manageable conditions, high cholesterol, thyroid disease, etc. One of the challenges with PFAS is it has not been the subject of extensive study until fairly recently, and so we're learning more and more each day about it. And the nature of PFAS is that it embeds itself in the tissues of the body, so it has the possibility of affecting a wider range of systems.
Aaron, is it feasible to clean the whole country of PFAS?
It's not really feasible to clean everything. What you can do is eliminate the ongoing contamination. So take, for example, you have an existing dump site that's been uncovered. That material can be removed and appropriately disposed of. And so now we've at least eliminated future contamination and ongoing contamination into the groundwater. That doesn't change the fact that the underlying groundwater is still contaminated. There are a number of companies who are trying to come up with some solutions to treat groundwater. That's obviously a very big problem to do, very expensive to do. And so the short-term solution is not really cleaning up, it is a mitigation.
When you have contaminated groundwater, does it then get into the food supply as well?
Yes, it does, and it's a big problem, and I think that's the thing you're going to hear the most about going forward. Probably the most uncovered story is that there is PFAS in food. Take, for example, milk. You can have cows who are drinking water. Unbeknownst to anybody, that water could be contaminated, and you end up with PFAS in the milk, and then that works its way through the food supply. But it's not just milk. There are other food products, irrigated products, produce, things of that nature that could be affected by PFAS.
How long do these chemicals remain a danger? The news refers to them as forever chemicals. Is that accurate?
It really is. I mean, you'd measure it in geologic time, so as far as we're concerned, it's forever. It'll be forever in the groundwater unless someone comes up with a really great idea to somehow clean that up, which seems unlikely. You know, the river that runs adjacent to the tannery that's the subject of our case still to this day has high amounts of PFAS in it, and the tannery has been closed for over 10 years and has long since ceased actually dumping directly to the river. So decades and decades later, we still see high concentrations of PFAS in a moving water system. So that should tell us quite a bit about the persistence of these chemicals.
So when the person has PFAS in their bloodstream, can it be removed or are they stuck with it for life?
They are basically stuck with it for life. So when you get PFAS in your body, the body does not have an effective way of eliminating it. So it finds its way into soft tissues and it just attaches to those organs and it basically stays there forever.
PFOA and PFAS, however you say them, they've both been banned from manufacturing. Does that mean that we're simply dealing with the remnants of the old chemicals now, or is new pollution still being generated?
It's both. We have, of course, we have the remnants of the original Scotchgard PFAS materials, and that is what a lot of the focus is in a lot of the litigation, because it's legacy, it's historic dumping, it's historic contamination that has persisted over time. But the formulas have changed. We still have waterproofing, stain-resistant products, waterproof shoes and stain-resistant carpet and furniture and so on and so forth. So these sorts of chemicals, this family of PFAS chemicals still exist today. There are multiple formulations, over 3,000 variables of PFAS. So if you're trying to look at it one by one, it's very hard to do extensive study of 3,000 individual chemicals.
So you're saying that there are many chemicals being commonly used right now that we simply don't know if they're dangerous or not?
Yeah, I think that's exactly true. I mean, if we went back to the 1950s and 60s when the original PFAS, Scotchgard, commercial application of that material started, there probably was very little publicly known about the dangers of those chemicals. And so we're not really in any different position today. A company invents a new formulation, it's a new chemical, it requires some study, which then takes some number of years to complete.
Finally, fast forward 20 years. Is this going to be completely solved by then, do you think?
I think that we are getting a much better handle through the testing and the prevalence of testing where the problems are. I think we will understand the people most directly affected. So if there are municipal water supplies, private water supplies that are affected, we will have understood that and hopefully mitigated and cut off that exposure. I think long term, it is difficult to see how this all gets cleaned up. So I think we're just going to be dealing with the situation of remediation and mitigation 20 years from now.
Aaron Phelps, thanks for visiting Planet America.
Thanks, nice to be here.
And that's it, we're done. Go to sleep.
But then wake up again and watch The Extra on iView, YouTube and Facebook. We thrive on attention.
Bye-bye.